Have you ever felt like your life was falling apart, only to realize something deeper was waking up inside you? Despair isn't just pain, it's a signal, a crack in the surface that dares you to look within, to confront the truth you've been avoiding. What if the very moment you fear the most is the one that can finally set your soul free? Despair is a signal, not a sentence. Kierkegaard believed despair wasn't a failure, it was a revelation. When you despair, you're not breaking down. You're being shown that the life you've built doesn't match the self you're meant to become. Despair isn't the end, it's the start of the real inner journey. Apply this by asking, what is this pain trying to tell me about who I truly am? Despair often feels like the end, a collapse, a failure, a dark night with no morning. But Kierkegaard invites us to see it differently, not as punishment, but as a signal, a spiritual alarm that something within us is misaligned with who we truly are. In daily life, this means that the moments we feel most lost are often the moments we're closest to being found. Despair arises not from weakness, but from a quiet knowing that the life we're living is out of sync with our deepest truths. It's not the enemy, it's the message. So instead of running from despair or numbing it with distractions, we can begin to listen. What is it revealing? What have we outgrown? What part of ourselves is yearning to awaken? By viewing despair as a signal, we empower ourselves to respond, not react. We step out of victimhood and into authorship. The very pain we feared becomes a turning point, the moment we begin building a life that feels honest, alive, and whole. It's not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a better one if you're willing to face it with courage and the faith that who you are becoming is worth the discomfort of letting go. The false self must die. We often live behind masks, the successful one, the likable one, the obedient one. Kierkegaard's message: despair arises when your soul rebels against these illusions. Letting go of the false self is painful, yes, but it's the only path to freedom. Motivation: you don't need to become someone, you need to return to yourself. The false self is the version of us we construct to survive. The mask we wear to be accepted, praised, or protected. It's built on expectations, fear, and ego. But deep down, we know it isn't real. It keeps us safe, yes, but it also keeps us small. Kierkegaard understood that to live authentically, this false self must die, not in a violent way, but through a shedding, a conscious release of the roles, stories, and identities that no longer serve who we're meant to be. This means recognizing the difference between what you do to be liked and what you do because it feels true. It's the courage to say no when it's easier to please, to choose purpose over performance, to admit when you've outgrown your old self. And while letting go of the false self can feel like losing control, what you're really doing is gaining your freedom. You're not erasing yourself. You're finally becoming who you are beneath the noise. This process is uncomfortable, even lonely at times, but it is the path to a life that feels rooted, powerful, and real. Sometimes the truest beginning comes after the brave ending. Only through despair can we choose ourselves. Unlike animals or machines, humans are condemned or gifted with the burden of choosing who to be. Despair creates the existential crisis that forces this choice. You can remain a passive bystander in your own life or choose to act with authenticity. That is the true leap of faith. Despair strips away the noise. It exposes the illusions we've leaned on, the titles, relationships, and routines we thought defined us. In that silence, something remarkable happens. We're left face to face with ourselves, with no one else to answer to but the truth within. Kierkegaard believed that only through despair do we truly become capable of choosing ourselves, not the version shaped by others' expectations, but the self that is aligned with purpose, freedom, and authenticity. Despair becomes a mirror revealing not what's broken in us, but what's been buried. This means when you're at your lowest, you're also at a point of raw power. You can choose differently. You can begin again, not by chasing perfection, but by owning your existence. You decide what matters. You define what success looks like. You pick the path, not out of habit, but from clarity. The next time despair knocks, don't turn away. Sit with it. Ask it what it's trying to show you. Then step forward, not as the person the world molded, but as the one you are always meant to be. Choosing yourself isn't easy. It's everything. Spiritual growth demands inner collapse. Every spiritual awakening begins with a kind of death. Despair tears down the ego's fortress. But it also clears the ground for something deeper to rise, a self rooted not in external validation, but in inner truth. You can build a new identity, one based on your own voice, values, and vision. Real spiritual growth rarely happens in moments of comfort. It arrives through collapse, when the structures you've built around your identity, your worth, and your beliefs no longer hold. This inner fall isn't the end. It's the clearing of false foundations so that something truer, deeper, and more resilient can emerge. When life shakes you to your core, when things stop making sense, when your ambitions feel hollow, or when a deep sadness takes root, it's easy to label it as failure or weakness. But what if it's not a breakdown, but a breakthrough in disguise? This collapse might look like burnout, a loss of direction, or a season of silence, but if you're willing to stay with it, to not rush to escape or numb it, you'll discover an inner clarity that can't be taught, only earned. Letting go of what once defined you creates space for who you actually are. In that collapse, illusions fall away, pride dissolves, and what's left is the quiet beginning of wisdom, compassion, and a soul no longer performing, but being. True growth doesn't always look like rising. Sometimes it looks like falling and choosing to rebuild from the inside out. Hope is born when you no longer flee. Running from despair keeps it alive, turning toward it transforms it. As Kierkegaard said, the greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all. Facing despair may be the most courageous act, because in doing so, you recover yourself. Hope doesn't come from escaping your pain, but from facing it fully, courageously, and without flinching. When you stop running from the discomfort, the fear, the anxiety, or the despair, something powerful begins to shift. You realize that what you've been avoiding isn't as terrifying as the endless exhaustion of fleeing it. Avoidance can take many forms: distraction, perfectionism, pretending everything is fine. But behind every mask we wear is a quiet longing, not just to be safe, but to be free. And freedom only comes when you meet yourself honestly, even in the darkest places. When you finally stop fleeing, you begin to see your suffering not as a wall, but as a doorway. You begin to hear your inner voice with more clarity. The chaos softens. You discover that you're more capable than you ever imagined, not because the pain vanished, but because you stayed. Real hope is born in that stillness. It's not a fantasy that things will magically get better, but the unshakable sense that you can walk through the fire and come out wiser, stronger, and more alive. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to stop running. And that decision changes everything. So what did Kierkegaard mean when he said despair awakens the soul? He believed that only by confronting the cracks within, the moments we would rather run from, can we begin to live authentically. Despair, then, is not the end. It's the beginning of self-discovery, the silent invitation to choose yourself fully and without illusion. If you ever faced a moment that shook you awake, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear how your own soul began to stir. And if this message struck a chord, the next video in this series dives even deeper into the quiet battles we fight in the dark and how they lead us to strength we didn't know we had. Click on it now and let's keep walking this path of depth and awakening together.